My name is Jason Bridges, for anybody who doesn't know me and who I haven't introduced myself to already. And I was asked to moderate this, not having my select board hat on, but more just trying to help facilitate the conversation so they can really think about the answers to the questions that you might have. The idea for this was a little driven by a dispensary opening in a couple weeks, right? So we'll have our first adult rec shop opening up soon. So this is a little driven by that. But it's also a place that, hopefully a very safe place where everybody, whatever side or angle you have, you'll be able to listen and learn, whether you're for cannabis or you're really nervous about it or you're fearful of it or wherever you're at, that we can have an open conversation and really not judge, just really listen and ask questions. The way it's going to work tonight, we've got 60 to 75 minutes, depending on how it goes, to have this panel answer questions and discuss amongst themselves and with you anything about cannabis, but kind of, I guess, centered towards children, how it affects children, safety, and I want to say, and prevention. And so I emailed each of the panelists. This is how I'm going to kind of introduce them kind of randomly. I asked them, what do they want to get out of this forum? If I'm going to moderate it, what do you want to get out of it? What does success look like? And here's some of the responses I get just to frame what we're going to be talking about. My idea of success for this forum is to feel at the end that we've shown the community that marijuana use is complicated, much like alcohol. I want anti-cannabis residents to feel heard and perhaps feel less anxious about the Green Lady opening, but also let those who hope to be customers not feel like they will be looked at as criminals or bad people. I thought that was really good. Another goal was educating parents and youth about the damage any substance use is to the developing brain. I've had some, that's from one of our panelists. Another one was I hope that at the end of the night, people can feel that with education, guidance, and knowledge, they can see that consumers can use marijuana safely and intelligently, keeping themselves, their children, and even their pets safe. Another one was there needs to be education about cannabis withdrawal syndrome and other cannabis-related disorders. I think the whole point of this participation is to comfortably open a discussion with a person's physician and our other healthcare providers, debunk myths, and normalize the topic. And the last one I got, success to me looks like people being able to draw more connections between history, science, public health, and town-related policies. So I thought that was this is the panel that we have. We're not going to get into long introductions. I'm just going to start asking a question. I think our panel will be able to introduce themselves when they start talking and kind of talk about their history with all of this as they speak. So first question to get us going. I will take questions and comments from the crowd. This is being recorded, so please come to this microphone. If for whatever reason you can't get there, I'll bring you a microphone. If you want to ask a question and you're super nervous, I'll give you a piece of paper and you can write it down and I will read it for you. Christy, that's for you. Okay? All right, here's the first question to get us going. With drugs like opioids, heroin, fentanyl, why are we spending time talking about pot? Pot seems it's been around for many, many, many decades. Why are we spending time talking about pot?
Can I take that one?
Sure.
Okay, so very specifically.
You're speaking to the microphone, so it's up.
I can try. Thank you. Okay, so that brief period of time where we had prohibition in our country? So when prohibition ended, all of the people involved with the prohibition enforcement were afraid that they were not going to have jobs anymore. So they started looking for what could be like the next thing we get Americans really freaked out about so that we have justification for some type of drug enforcement agency to remain active. And the product that they picked, specifically under pressure from the emerging nylon fabric industry, was cannabis. And they set out on a very successful and very expensive public marketing campaign to convince Americans in the 30s and 40s that cannabis was the next big thing that they should be concerned about. And part of the reason that they did that was super duper racist. And it's one of the reasons that you hear people say marijuana when they mean cannabis, because marijuana is the Spanish word for cannabis. And it was done specifically to draw this link of Americans' very notorious fear of immigration, and to say it is immigrants, specifically Spanish-speaking immigrants, bringing cannabis with them to the United States and getting God-fearing Americans hooked on cannabis, and it's ruining their lives. And that was a story that was spread and promulgated by the US government over and over and over and over again until people believed it as a fairly common narrative in this country. So that is why we are focused on cannabis in this country, why we're spending a lot of time, energy, and money on cannabis, and the danger of it is because we have this history of drug policy in the United States being influenced by a legacy of xenophobia and a bunch of old white guys who are scared of losing their jobs.
Could you introduce yourself?
My name is Sarah Schakowsky. I am a clinical social worker, and I manage the social services department at the hospital.
Sue, why do we need to talk about cannabis here in Nantucket? That was a very good take on the history of it.
Absolutely. So my name is Sue Mintonen. I'm the program director for ASAP, which is the Alliance for Substance Abuse Prevention. So obviously my take is prevention-based, and I think the reason I want to talk about cannabis today is because it's the second most widely used substance by our high school and middle school students. And at their brain development time in life, any substance that they use is possibly doing some real damage to how their brain develops. And it's really important to try and keep that use from happening until they're much older and their brain is fully developed. So from that standpoint, I'm just trying to protect kids from the negative impacts of any substance, but particularly marijuana, because it is very popular amongst our youth on Nantucket.
Tess, I know you had, when you emailed me, you had some things similar to that.
Yeah, thanks. So my name's Tess Alberti. I'm the executive director of Fairwinds, Nantucket's Counseling Center, but I'm speaking similar to Sarah as a clinician. I'm a licensed substance abuse clinician and licensed mental health counselor. So similar to Sue, I think the normalization of cannabis being here, we're not debating it, it's here. And what we want to aim for, what I personally like to do is educate parents on the teens and the young people using it regularly and the long-term effects of what that does for brain development. So of the yesteryear pot from the 60s and 70s, it was a much lower level of THC. We're looking at 4 to 6% versus what is now commonly on the market, which can be as potent and as concentrated as 90%. What we notice through research, one of the most commonly cited articles is the Dunnan study out of New Zealand, which followed 1,000 young people for 30 years. And noticed with long-term use, there was lower IQ, lower motivation, an increase in anxiety and depression, and actually withdrawal symptoms from heavy use. What we see now is that there could be clinical implications of motivation of getting through those next steps of life, of graduating high school, going on to either a trade or a workforce, sometimes having challenges with their own mental health and misusing cannabis as a protective factor. That brain development is so pivotal in those young years that the same way we talk about alcohol is it shouldn't be used by young people while the brain is developing if we know it's going to impact memory. Some of the things we also are very worried about in the clinical field is out of Boston Children's Hospital, they have been able to identify the gene that links to psychosis. And this AKT gene is 7 times more likely to be turned on by the cannabinoids in the pot that is being smoked and eaten, used today. So if there was a predisposition of genetics saying that there might have been a psychotic mental health condition within a family member, that mental health condition might not have happened till the early 20s or maybe mid 20s or even possibly the 30s. And that was a lot of life that people could have without having psychosis as a major symptom. And we now know that if there is a predisposition and there's cannabis use at 11, at 12, at 13, psychosis may happen sooner. And that trajectory of that young person's life may change forever. So we're going to be sharing some information, and we think that there is a place for cannabis for Parkinson's, for cerebral palsies, for lots of things. We are not saying that it's good for the young and developing brain.
Aline, would you like to hop in there at all before I get over to Nicole? I have a couple questions for her.
My name's Aline Womack. I'm an RN. Tess just took my whole lecture. My background was at San Francisco General. I ran the emergency psychiatry service there, as well as the addiction medicine division. And now I am the clinical coordinator for Addiction Solutions program that Dr. Lepre started. What I wanted to bring to the table was my experience with marijuana in treating people with AIDS and the positive effects of it, as well as the concerns that we've all been talking about in terms of availability here and youngsters getting involved with it. This whole panel came out of a discussion early on in I guess it was late spring, after we'd had an open forum here, and someone in the group was talking about they wanted to bring their child to the forum to discuss. I guess we were discussing generalized substance abuse at that point, and one of their neighbors said, "No, don't do that. This is an adult discussion." And we as clinicians started to say, "No, wait a minute. We're supposed to be leaders in this community. Why can't we have discussions? Why can't we normalize this topic? Whether or not a place got licensed or not was not our issue. Our issue as clinicians is providing the best information we have possible and to set an environment and a stage for people to be comfortable going to their physicians." And not all physicians are widely educated on these things, to talk about strengths and weaknesses and things that may or may not be good for an individual. So that's how we kind of got to this place tonight. We hope that this will be a really open dialogue and is the beginning of a series of discussions that we can have over the winter. One of our goals is to put together an educational experience for the youngsters in grade school, to talk about what their knowledge base is. This knowledge just doesn't sit at this level. Kids are watching you all the time, and they're picking up opinions, and they're picking up ideas, and they're going to experiment. So we hope that out of this discussion with you as the community, that we can learn from each other now that you know what our goals are, and that this is the beginning of many forums. So thank you.
Well said. Nicole, would you like to jump in there? I have a lot of questions for you on your packaging and all that stuff, and I'm excited to talk about. But do you want to segue right into that, or do you want to comment on?
Introduce myself generally. So I just wanted to give a little background. Several weeks ago, these lovely. Is it on?
Just pull a little closer.
Push it.
Okay.
There you go.
There you go.
So these lovely people invited us from the Green Lady to meet with them. And I was a little skeptical at first. I was a little worried at first, but actually they all turned out to be very, very nice people. And we had a good conversation. And I realized that at the end of the conversation, it was important to share knowledge and share information. They specialize in areas that I don't specialize in. I don't know or do or deal with the things that you deal with. So I guess I'm a representative at this table as someone who can speak to it from a different side, maybe all the people who can participate in this industry and be okay and be responsible consumers. So that's what I kind of hope to add to this panel.
Would anybody like to any other comments on this topic?
The last thing I'll say is that out of the Pride survey, which Sue's probably going to touch, the most protective factor for youth and the long-term substance use or not using is parent education and involvement. So that is just our takeaway, that we know that if anyone walks away with more information from questions here and you bring it back to your families, that's a wonderful outcome.
I got to agree with that 120%. So here we go. Is that better? I took a tour of the Green Lady Dispensary yesterday for about an hour and 15 minutes. And I think at the end I said to you and everybody who was walking around with me, I wish everybody could get this tour. Whether you ever use or not, you just respect the process and that it's very professional. At least this dispensary that and I'm sure, Mike, yours is going to be the same way. I was just really, really impressed of the education I got of how long and hard and difficult it is to do what you guys are doing and the systems you have in place and the security. And I don't know if this is a good segue into how do we keep these out of the, accidentally getting these in children's hands, right? Parents are responsible, but they mess up a little bit. They leave the package on the table. Well, Nicole and Rupert handed me this package. May I?
Yes. This is called an exit bag, and everything that's sold leaves the store in this exit bag. It's white, plain, opaque. It will have the symbols on the outside. The warning symbols contains THC. And so that's what it leaves the store in.
How long did it take me to figure this out? Even after you showed me how to do it to open it? 10 minutes? Jack, you showed me like 3 or 4 times and I couldn't get it. It just doesn't make sense of how this opens. And I'm gonna see if I can do it now. It's something like pushing down and, all right. It is very hard, very difficult. So I felt really good after seeing this, that a child that, even if there's instructions are there, can't read, is not going to be able to get into this. And then there was, the other packaging, which I actually never got that open. And there's instructions.
Well, there's more. Can you open that? I put
Oh,
several
sure.
examples. So everything leaves the store in this white plain bag. It doesn't say the Green Lady. It doesn't say what's inside of it. It has the warning symbols. And then inside of there are several examples of the additional packaging. And each one of those pieces of packaging are also certified child resistant. So they are child resistant and they go in a bag that is child resistant.
So this I learned, if you don't mind me going through my experience.
Yes, we showed you that one yesterday.
I figured this one out and I thought, okay, maybe that one's a little easier to open. And then you said this has to also be able to someone elderly to be able to open this for the medical use. Mm-hmm. And so you have to push on both sides. And I have a 17-month-old daughter, and I know that she pushes buttons like this. She would never know to squeeze and right. So I felt really comfortable after seeing these things. But I don't know if anybody ever wanted to look at these. I can pass them around. You can check them out.
Try the box.
I got this one.
Sorry,
All
it's
right.
like putting you on the spot there with a puzzle, like Rubik's Cube.
Oh, so it's gonna be something with this, right? Pushing in both ends.
Are you smarter than a 5th grader? This is where we are.
So this one I got, but I had to push in both ends here. So could you also talk about how this is all approved, child safety approved, or the process?
Yes, the packaging companies have to get it certified as child resistant. They go through a process to make sure that it is. And so we have to buy product that's packaging that's certified child resistant. So there's many layers of this involved in it. And we always educate consumers to store the product in the original packaging and put the packaging in a safe location out of the reach of children.
Any other comments or thoughts on?
Nicole, I would love for you to share everything you shared with us as far as with edibles, that they can't look like other identifiable candies, that there has to be the potency, there has to be servings amount. All of that I find really fascinating. Do you mind sharing that?
Yes, so these are some of the edible bags, that they go into. Every edible has to be marked with a contains THC symbol. So it doesn't look just like a brownie. For example, our brownies, on one side of them are covered in green symbols warning saying contains THC. And these are actually made of gelatin. If you talk to the chef, it's made out of gelatin and it's edible. So you can eat the warning labels. So there's not a thing that goes out that doesn't say it contains THC. Also, one of the things that, in my opinion, is better about this is they all on the box have the dosage. So you know exactly what dosage you're getting. The problem with what people do when they try to make their own is you have no idea what you're getting. And then you can't have consistent results. You can't eat something and know that every time you can expect to have the same results. It could be too potent. It could be nothing at all. So it's very important, just like if you were buying a prescription, you want to know that every time you are taking a pill from the doctor, it's the same amount of medicine in that pill. So giving consumers the ability to know exactly what they're consuming is very important so you can have the results that you expect. Another piece of it is education, letting people know that edibles take quite a long time. They get processed in your liver. So everybody processes edibles differently, and it can take up to 2 hours. So one of the most common mistakes people do is they take a little bit of an edible and they don't feel anything, and it tastes good, and then they take some more, and then it really tastes good, and they take some more, and before they know it, they've taken too much. It is actually the most common thing that happens, and I really do want to bring that up because that is the most common reason people go to ERs, because they accidentally ingest too much product, they don't wait the appropriate amount of time, and then they get frightened from eating too much. So we always say start low and go slow. So start with the lowest amount of edibles, take a little bit and wait, don't rush, and then see what you're used to. Some people can eat a lot of edibles and be okay, and some people have no tolerance for it.
Sue?
I just wanted to mention I was at a conference last week, and there were a lot of different doctors and researchers presenting on edibles specifically. I saw more examples of packages that looked like Skittles, that they couldn't guarantee how much was in any particular candy or brownie or cookie. And I'm assuming it's mass law that has learned from these problems so that the Green Lady can offer a much safer, much more informed product for people, because they were seeing lots of young children who are just eating gummy bears because they're kids and they see gummy bears. And the packaging we have here is clearly designed to attract adults who can read and not get into the hands of kids, which is thankful.
No edibles can look like commercially available candy. So you can't make gummy bears. You can't even call them gummy. You can't even use the word gummy. Even if you make something that's similar consistency, that word's not allowed to be used. And I do think Massachusetts learned in one way, because a lot of other states allow up to 10 milligrams per serving, but Massachusetts only allows 5 milligrams per serving. So they are on the low side of every other state.
Any questions or even comments from the audience about edibles, or what they call MIPs? Is that the same thing?
Yeah, marijuana infused products.
We should call those CIBs, right, Sarah? Yeah, John? Hold on a second.
Microphone.
You were just kind of mentioning like how much is too much. Is there guidance on that based on weight or things like that?
Yes. So what we would do probably, and this is important, we've worked very hard at training over the last couple months the people who we call our sales agents, which we also call bud tenders. So we're training them very carefully about providing advice to consumers, especially people who've come in and never tried this type of thing before. So we have some products that have very little bits of THC in them, down to just 2 milligrams per serving, and some combinations of THC and CBD, which probably people know a lot more about CBD because it's discussed more. But so we have low dosage or microdose packages, and we would probably tell a person, no matter what your size or weight or female, male, whatever, to go slow. Start maybe with 2 or only 2.5 milligrams and see how that makes you feel, and work your way up. You can clearly see the size of a serving, and it's better. It's more comfortable for people to enjoy what they're doing than accidentally eat too much and not enjoy it.
have one question. I know how you're going to keep them out of hands of younger people. How are you going to educate the teenagers?
Educate who?
Teenagers.
Well, personally, our goal is not to ever have teenagers ever come into our shop. We have multiple layers of security, so they will not enter. We have 2 stages where their IDs are checked. And one of the stages where their IDs are checked is with a very sophisticated piece of equipment that no other liquor store has on this entire island. It checks 1,000 different points on the front and the back of the ID. So we're so safe. I don't expect any of them to get into the store at all, ever. And if they try, their IDs will be confiscated. So I'm only looking to sell to legal adults over the age of 21. I have no interest in entertaining any teenagers who try to sneak in there and get product that they shouldn't get. So they won't be getting it from us, is our goal. I do think it's important to educate adults to be safe and to, again, lock things up, put things away, don't leave product out, because that would be the way it would end up getting into the hands of teenagers through people leaving things out in the house or about, for example.
And I think another thing that all of us on this table are trying to do is have open community forums, invite young people, invite parents to it, and partnering with the school system so that this is an ongoing effort where we're able to get in front of the youth and talk about this as well. So this is hopefully a multi-layered and not a one-time conversation, but ongoing talking about it.
I'd like to build on that too. I think the research shows that teenagers learn best when they're in groups with other teenagers and can have a discussion that's led about a specific topic. And to me, in my mind, when I get into these arguments about whether or not we should open discussion, I don't see this as any different than sex education. You don't want your kids going out and getting pregnant and making bad choices. And the way that starts, or the way you take care of that, is to have open communication in the home, have education in the school systems, provide forums, provide opportunities. And I think that that's where we are coming from at this point.
Sue?
Thank you, Tess, for reminding me to plug this great program that both ASAP and Fairwinds do together when we partner with the Boys and Girls Club. We have some young folks that are in recovery that volunteer to come and talk with teens at teen night about, they can talk about any topic they want, but the young adults that come are open to talking about their alcohol and drug use that they've thankfully survived and are in recovery from. But they will answer any question that the teens bring up. And we've had, I think, 4, or we're headed into our 4th or 5th next Saturday night, teen night. And it's completely without judgment. We try to make sure that the folks that are there as the in recovery people don't have kids. Like, there's no connection other than they're just local people who are willing to share their story. And they don't judge the kids. The kids really can say, well, we smoke pot after school, or whatever the situation is. And I think the info exchange is really great. We get great feedback, not only from the young adults who tell us a little bit about what the kids are asking, just because we want to make sure that they're finding it fulfilling, but the kids are too. The teens that come, they're mostly 8th, 9th, 10th graders, but some 11th and 12th graders dare to chat. And the kids are finding it really valuable, and we're grateful that we have folks willing to share that with them, because maybe they're not going to listen to us middle-aged folks, but someone closer to their age is a little more relatable.
Yeah, the question.
Hi, thank you for.
Yep, it's recorded.
Okay, I have a 2-part question. The green lady, is it adult use or medical?
So it so happened that we are opening first for adult use and soon after for medical.
Okay.
It's just happened to end up that way.
Okay, and I wanted to know what the symptoms were for ingesting too much of the edibles, and are there any registered cases in Nantucket and Massachusetts of what is it, overdosing, if you will, on edibles?
Could you answer that with her question there so everybody can hear what she asked? Whoever wants to tackle that.
Go ahead. No, you go.
So, yes, there have been some overdoses with edibles in the emergency room. When people come in, they are frequently feeling like their heart is racing. They may have a lot of anxiety, right up to feeling like they're panicked. We've had one case where someone actually was hearing and seeing things that weren't there. That's more rare. Most of the treatment that happens for these individuals is supportive treatment. We keep them in a quiet environment. We give them a lot of emotional support. If, in fact, they need any kind of medication at all, it's generally a benzodiazepine like Ativan, which is very short acting, but it helps calm things down. More often than not, it's just keeping them comfortable, hydrated, and placed in a safe environment. I think you want to speak to the young child.
You can.
Okay. There was a child that was brought into the emergency room who mistakenly got into their parents' edibles, and the child did very well. But again, it was one of those situations where it was very, very frightening for everybody that was concerned. Okay.
And some other things that happen that we're concerned about is so when people use cannabis and when they use too much of it, especially when it's being eaten, it's going to have a much longer half-life. It's going to be in your body for a very long time feeling those symptoms. It can range from extreme panic and shortness of breath and feeling like that it's a heart attack. It can lead to psychotic-like symptoms. And in situations like that, there have been individuals that put themselves in really, really risky situations. There's a lot of legislation that's looking at drugged driving. So what that looks around depth perception, time to do reflex and moving a car, and that there are car accidents that come out of it. Colorado has been tracking this for some time. In downtown Denver, there are now more than 700 retail dispensaries, which outnumber every single fast food location there from Taco Bell, McDonald's, etc. And they're seeing a group of 25 and younger that are having higher and higher rates of drug driving, car accidents, and fatalities. So it's not just the physical symptoms of having been over-drugged and overused cannabis. It's also the decision making that goes with that. So jumping off of piers, jumping off of boats, those sort of things on Nantucket happen with alcohol. We also want to think about that with young people making risky decisions. Yeah.
Sarah, you have anything?
Yeah. Couple things I would add to that. So we in the state of Massachusetts have a very arbitrary blood alcohol limit of 0.08. If you look at the clinical research on alcohol consumption and driving, there's pretty good data that there's no safe amount of alcohol in your system and driving. If you look at the clinical research, if you've had half a glass of wine, you have no business driving whatsoever. It is very similar when you look at driving and cannabis and that interaction. The recommendation is, regardless of how much you are using and whether or not you are misusing, that mixing that and driving is generally not a good idea. One of the things that's making it very hard from a legislating perspective is to decide how to define impairment and how to demonstrate impairment. But to my point about drug policy in our country, we don't always wait for science to give us a good answer before we make policy laws and before our government makes a decision. So, for example, Colorado has said it will be based on the micrograms of THC in your blood, despite overwhelming, compelling clinical evidence that that is not a good way to measure impairment. So, for example, if you are a regular cannabis user and on a Tuesday you've had no cannabis consumption, you could have a very high amount of micrograms of THC in your blood. So clinically, you're not impaired at all. You've ingested no cannabis that day. You are safe to go out and drive. But if you get pulled over and your blood is tested, you're considered an impaired driver and you could be arrested for drugged driving. Very similarly, a person who's naive to cannabis, meaning they've never had any cannabis, and today's the day they're going to take that adventure, they might have a very small, because they've followed your clinical recommendations about starting small, they might have only ingested 2 milligrams of cannabis, but in them, that creates a high level of impairment because they're very sensitive to it. So their blood level might say, oh, they've got a baby little bit of cannabis on board, but clinically they might be very impaired. So for people who are considering cannabis consumption, one of the things you should keep in mind is just like with alcohol, there is no reason on God's green earth you should mix it with driving ever under any circumstances whatsoever. And second of all, you should recognize that if you do drug and drive or drink and drive, that the laws that govern how much trouble you get into are not necessarily based in sound clinical evidence. And you could find yourself in quite a lot of trouble when practically you are not actually clinically putting yourself at risk. So not only is it important to understand the chemical consequences of substances that you ingest, but I think it's also important to understand that there are legal consequences and employment consequences, and whether or not those are sound or reasonable or we disagree with them or not, they do exist, and it's important to be informed about those.
Thank you. I could listen to you all day, Sarah.
Some people have that misfortune, unfortunately.
Well, we're lucky to have you in the position that you're in. Any comments or questions from audience? A lot of good stuff that's been talked about. Don't be shy. All right, while you're all thinking of that, I just have a couple slides here that Nicole brought, just so you can see. I think is this the first slide? Yeah, this is your entry, Nicole. Do you want to kind of walk us through, and I'll just kind of go through the slides as you like?
Sure. So at this point, you are still on the outside of the building. You haven't gone in yet. We have a bank teller style window. We are warning people not to come in unless you're 21 or we will confiscate your IDs. And we have a security guard behind that window who is going to be visually checking your IDs and buzzing you into the registration room. This is a picture of the registration room. At this point is when your IDs goes through the scanner, the sophisticated scanner I was mentioning before. When you're in here, you can't see into the rest of the store. All the glass is fogged, so you still can't see into the actual store. So it's an amazing scanner. They're going to make sure that you are over 21. When medical is up and running, you would be registered into the medical system in this room. And then finally, you would be buzzed into the sales floor. It's a great looking space. It's a nice place to go. There's smart, intelligent, educated people there to help you look at the products that we're selling. We have a menu with pricing. The pricing is comparable with what's on the mainland. On social media, people like to think it's going to be expensive, just like everything on Nantucket. It's not. It's priced the same as whatever you would go into a dispensary on the mainland. So let me see, something else that I could help you with to let you know is our software tracks how much you purchase. And that is how one way we are sure you are not purchasing too much. Even if you leave for the day and you come back the same day, it will track your purchases so you don't go over the state limit. And that's something that's very important to them so that people aren't purchasing excessive amounts and diverting it to the public. And we also can take debit cards and credit cards, so you don't have to have cash on you.
Nicole, can I ask you a question? Back to the tracking.
Mm-hmm.
When the second dispensary opens, is there a way for the tracking to encompass both so that a person doesn't go from one dispensary to buy something and then ends up in another dispensary? In the same way we look at MassPass when we're looking at medication, drugs, opioids, whatever. We run it through the Massachusetts system and we can see wherever anybody's buying anything.
I'm not completely sure about that. I will have to check into that and let you know. Mm-hmm. I will follow up on that.
All right.
Here's a picture for you to look at some of the edibles. So on the right-hand side, those are the symbols, not safe for kids and contains THC. Starting from the right, that's a truffle, and the white imprints say contains THC. Next to it is the bottom of a brownie. Those green symbols say contains THC, and there's another picture of truffles on the left. So all of those imprints are edible. They're made out of starch or something like that you can eat. And then one of the buttons, the topics down there is start low and go slow. Very important with edibles. Consume only a little bit, take your time, enjoy yourself, don't eat too much no matter how good it tastes. I went through some of the packaging here that we are using. Very important. Our packaging is child safe. We sell it in a child safe bag, but please, adults need to keep it away from children. They need to store it in places they can't reach. They need to put it locked cabinets out of the way for themselves and pets. And that was my slides.
Two questions.
Prescription process a little bit. Obviously, if it's a new thing in Massachusetts, then healthcare providers maybe,
It's okay, Georgie.
Could you explain the prescription process?
Yes.
I'm just thinking if it's a new law and healthcare providers aren't used to prescribing medical marijuana, who is regulating that process?
So if you don't mind, if I could ask my daughter to address that. She's been assisting me, and she's been very kindly making some consumer education materials which discuss the process of getting your prescription.
Hi. So basically what happens if you're trying to get your medical marijuana card is first you need to find a specialist or your regular doctor who can make a referral for you. After they write that letter of recommendation, you send it to the state system where you can then submit your application. They review it and they'll send you back a temporary card. So essentially, the main thing that you need to do is get that letter of recommendation and then proceed with just applying. I have at the Green Lady, we're going to have some handouts on exactly all the details on how to do that. So.
Hi. I was wondering if you guys could speak to the, obviously the major issue is child use, and I was wondering if you guys could speak to the legal states and what the results have been over a period of time. We've had over a decade in Colorado, so I was wondering if you guys had any kind of numbers, statistics, or any research based on that background.
One of the things I can talk about is mandated reporting. So those of us who work in counseling, who work at the hospital, who work in school systems or daycare facilities are mandated reporters, meaning we're required to report suspicions of child abuse or neglect. And the threshold for that in our state is heavily weighted towards if you even think there's a small chance you should report, you are meant to report. The way that Massachusetts has looked at the research out of Colorado is a parent's cannabis use in and of itself is not considered sufficient reason for a mandated reporter to file a complaint of neglect or abuse. So if the only thing a parent is doing that a healthcare provider takes issue with is smoking or imbibing in some other way cannabis products, that's not something that would be screened in by DCF. Now, that being said, there are no consequences for me as a mandated reporter if I file an improper report of child abuse or neglect and the state says, we're not going to screen this in, this is BS. There's no consequences for me. But the state will not investigate it. The state will not screen it in if that is the concern. The exception to that is if there is harm that happens to a child as a result of their parents' consumption. So, for example, if the argument is made that a parent was so badly under the influence that their child fell into the swimming pool because they didn't have adequate supervision and nearly drowned, and a healthcare provider says, I think that problem started because you were overusing cannabis, then potentially that could be a way that someone could, their consumption around parenting could put them at risk. But cannabis use as an adult and a parent in and of itself, Massachusetts has made the decision to say that that is not sufficient to warrant a claim of child abuse or neglect. So I know that's one very small example of research being used to inform practice, but it's something that affects how we do our job on a pretty regular basis.
So what we see through the research is that youth starting as young as 9, 10, 11, 12 have long-term impacts of increasing anxiety and depression. Most of them end up using it regularly, and we're not able to really wrap our hands around the potency or the frequency, but it's considered daily, regular use. They also look at the outcomes that happen with school and long-term work. So they're saying that there's a greater debt, more difficulty paying medical bills, less likely to have full-time work, oftentimes have lower income, lower educational achievement, and occupational prestige. They also say that, again, those that have a predisposition to serious mental health are having it sooner at more significant symptomatic results. So that's those that have thought disorders that had that naturally occurring in their family genetically, that it's turned on sooner, and are not able to have some of those adult daily living skills learned. And then, as I said, the Dunn study, which is one of the most commonly cited just because it's a 30-year longitudinal study. And then there's been lots of meta-analysis over 537 different articles that have cited it, saying that there's going to be an increase of frustration, lower IQ, poor memory, challenges with concentration. And what they're saying across the board is young developing brains do not have good outcomes with the cannabis that is now in the market. And that goes from the flower to any of the BHU or the vaping that goes across the board.
Excuse me, did you say 537 articles have suggested that it lowers the IQ?
Yeah.
537.
If you, so it's wonderful being in a clinical field because we're usually attached to all of our research libraries. But if you go onto Google Scholar, that's the back end of Google that does all of the peer evidence review. If you just cite youth cannabis, there are thousands of pages of articles talking about this and long-term impacts and effects of it.
That's scheduled as marijuana right now?
Whew. It's not because it's,
I don't think
it's not
I don't
federal.
think it is.
It was
heroin, codeine, and morphine.
It was a
The federal government has declared that marijuana has absolutely no medical therapeutic use. You're saying studies. They have, FDA doesn't even allow it to be studied, other than by the University of Kentucky.
Actually, there is more. Marijuana was a Schedule 1, and there's a move to have that changed. Schedule 1, you're absolutely correct, is any drug that is deemed not having medical, I don't know, efficacy is a good word for it. And that actually fell out of the politics that Sarah was talking about. Up until 1947, marijuana or cannabinoids were actually on the pharmacopoeia in the form of oils and tinctures for the treatment of anxiety and anorexia, not eating, not being able to eat. And then because of political reasons, that was removed and the laws got changed. Part of the reason that we haven't had research is because it was a Schedule 1 drug, but coming out of the AIDS epidemic,
Classified.
yeah, it still is. But coming out of the AIDS epidemic in the 80s and 90s, it was clear that there was some positive effects on certain kinds of illnesses, neuropathic pain, certain drug-related nausea and vomiting in cancer patients, and then neuropathic pain in patients who were dying from AIDS. So there was the beginning of research. And in other countries, they weren't held to that same standard, which is why she's quoting research that's coming out of Australia and other places.
I'll certainly look into the cocoa aspect, but
I'm happy to
I
give you
haven't
anything I have.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah.
Tom, we're going to go to Sue, and then we'll go over to Mike for the question. Next. Or comment.
Just going back to the earlier point about, what was it even beginning? As I wrote down what I wanted to say. What was the question you answered? Oh, it was the research. So
Impacts of youth.
Right. So
Yep.
one of the issues with young people using marijuana and really any substance is that it increases their risk for substance abuse disorder in the future of any kind. And that's based, it kind of makes any drug a gateway drug, whether they're, sniffing glue or drinking marijuana, opioids, even just as taking as prescribed can become risky because it affects the kind of pleasure impulses in the brain. And it's not necessarily from misusing it in abusing it like you would think people just using it all the time, but any use under 25 should be really monitored because those impulses in the brain can change and you need more of anything to feel the good results, whether it's, let's use caffeine because we're all probably caffeine addicts here. You'll need more and more and more. And on a developing brain, that can change exponentially. And that's one of the real baseline issues.
I must have misstated the question. I'm actually curious whether child use has increased in those states that have seen legality for an extended period of time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes, it has increased. I'm sorry, I don't have our stats right in front of us, but go ahead, Nicole.
I recently read an article. I actually was going to bring it with me, and I didn't remember to bring it. But in some states, like I remember Colorado, and I think Washington was one of it, they recently have been tracking it, and they said in states where it's legal, there is either the use of youths using marijuana has either stayed the same or decreased. It has not increased in states that have made it legal.
That's how I understood it. I understood that. I understood that it's actually the elderly folk that were around the age of 50 and up that have actually seen a huge increase with the volume of use.
Before I go to speak, let's get to the mic for people who are watching this later.
And may I add something really quick? Yes, sorry.
No, it's okay.
So the Pride survey's most recent results, so it was 739 kids, 422 out of the high school, 306 from the middle school. Use within the last 30 days, 60% of 10th graders had been using pot, 38% of 12th graders had. So this was comparative to Martha's Vineyard and the Commonwealth, much higher uses than historical.
Are you speaking of Massachusetts?
I'm talking about Nantucket specific. Nantucket specific. Yeah. But I think in general, related to Colorado, the numbers have gone up. Yeah.
So my name is Mike Grasso. I'm the head of cultivation and operations at the Green Lady. And I've worked in 4 states now in the legal adult use marijuana industry. And we're right in saying that overall, in general, adult use basically is intended to reduce the amount of teen use and youth use of cannabis. And typically in states where it is legalized, you do see a percentage of drop in rate of teen use. And that is almost directly correlated to the fact that it's more difficult for people to get cannabis in regulated recreational industries, recreational adult use industries. It typically becomes more difficult for teens to get their hands on it when people who want to buy it legally can go get it at a store as opposed to an illegal drug dealer. So that's something that we're here to do in Massachusetts in the adult use industry, and here on the island specifically. We want to help make sure that people who want to get this product can get it safely. They can get a safe product that's produced safely, and they're all over the age of 21. Like I said, we're here to help make sure that these kids don't get a hand of things that they're not supposed to have. And so that's a big part of being a part of the recreational industry, is recognizing that it's our job to help make sure that kids don't get it. Now you can look at us as the biggest supplier of marijuana on the island, and you can be sure that the new biggest supplier of marijuana is not giving it to kids. So I hope that makes people feel a little bit better about what we're doing.
And if anybody wants to read the study that we're talking about, it is a study published very recently in 2019 in February in the American Journal of Drug and Alcohol Abuse. And specifically what their study found is that teens in states that have decriminalized or legalized medical marijuana or both are not smoking pot more than they used to.
Just to follow up on some numbers that Tess supplied from the Pride survey, one of the other questions that came up and was I think a frightening number to me was that of all the drugs that we asked about, marijuana, the students reported that marijuana was the easiest to get a hold of. And that's concerning that they found, I mean, there's probably alcohol in most homes. And that's been legal to have in your home forever, or not forever, but for the better part of the last 100 years. And they're saying marijuana is easier for them to ascertain. And that's a real significant problem. So I'm hoping that the regulation will help. And I'm wondering if the folks from the Green Lady know what happens to the illegal market when dispensaries open, because I don't have a lot of information about that.
Well, one thing that it is a problem, right? And there were recent articles even in Boston and even up in Canada, which has done a different path for legalization. It is still a problem with the black market. One thing that we're trying to do, when I mentioned the pricing earlier, is we are pricing it at the going price. So we are not making it more expensive where people would not feel like going to our store to purchase it and stick with the black market. So pricing is very important to bring people in off the black market. Also, my opinion is, now that I have gone to other states where it's legal, I like going to a store where I know how it's grown. I know that they're not using pesticides, they're not using bad chemicals. I like knowing that I'm buying, for example, a vape cartridge, and I know how it's being made. I know that it doesn't contain things like propylene glycol. And I think that if you're going to consume something, you want to, just like you might go to a Whole Foods or a market like that, you want to know you're buying healthy products. Personally, I have been in charge recently of doing the testing of the products, and we are thoroughly testing our products for microbial contaminants, aflatoxins, ethanol residuals, the cannabinoid profile. So our products are highly regulated and tested. And honestly, you probably are more likely to get Salmonella or E. coli from your meat or your lettuce than you are from anything we grow. So I hope that draws people in. Anybody who cares about what they consume would want to buy it from a safe place.
One of the things about the Pride study is, so the Pride study, just in case people don't know this, is a study of current students in the public school system. And one of the things that's frightening to me about what's the easiest substance to get, in the state of Massachusetts, parents are legally allowed to give alcohol to their own children. They're not allowed to give it to anybody else's children. So the whole, I'd rather you drink at home because it's so much safer, that's not legal. But as a parent, you are allowed to furnish alcohol to your own children. So the fact that we have young people who perhaps are just misinformed about the law, but that we have young people saying it's easier for me to get cannabis products than it is for me to get alcohol, which I'm legally allowed to get from my parents, it's fascinating.
It was close, but marijuana beat it out.
Just talking about the black market a little bit, kind of that historically has affected the minority population. So what are we doing as a community to help offset the opening of a legal dispensary?
You mean in the sense of how the opening of our facility affects the minorities, are you just saying? I want to make sure I understand. Yeah. Well, one thing I can say is we have put a great deal of effort into hiring a diverse staff. I'm quite proud. I don't have the numbers with me, but we've hired a lot of minorities, people from the African American community, Hispanic community, LGBTQ community. So we put a lot of effort in our hiring practices to have a really diverse staff. And I was talking with some people about that at the state recently, and they were really surprised that we could do that on Nantucket, because I think our staff is more diverse than the general population of Nantucket. So I'm kind of proud of that. So I think if you put effort in, you can achieve things like that.
Sarah, could you speak to the fact that you had brought up before about the benefits of decriminalization of marijuana and how that does affect the minority population? I found that to be fascinating. Sarah had brought that up at a meeting.
Yeah, so one of the things, and I will be very transparent, this is a personal opinion that I have. And I can show you lots of research to back it up, but this is a personal opinion that I have, which is that drug policy in this country disproportionately affects people of color and people of the LGBTQ community, as well as people with physical disabilities. So whether or not the law is inherently biased or whether the law is wielded against people with bias, the fact remains that if you look at sentencing, if you look at time actually spent in prison, if you look at the school to prison pipeline in our country, it dramatically affects people of color at a much higher rate. So one of the things that has been proposed is to say, if we are going to decriminalize or legalize, what are we doing about the people that are incarcerated on nonviolent drug crimes? What are we doing to support them if in this day and age they would not have gone to prison? What are we doing to allow them to reunify with their families and with their communities and not have that conviction on their record? So to me, when we talk about this process of restorative justice, that would be one of the things that I'd like to see our state take initiative on and go a step further. I think, Christy, to your point, that would be something that we could do to really support diversity in our community. There is not a current proposal to do that in our state, but I'd really like to see us get there.
While you're thinking of your next question, we got about 15 more minutes. Wanted to kind of go over, Nicole and Rupert, you know this very well, and Mike, you know, that each dispensary has a local tax of 3%. That 50% local tax that we sat up here as a select board and decided that 50% of it will go to substance abuse prevention. There's also a 3% community impact fee, which goes to infrastructure, things that maybe we don't know, whether it's water or sewer or public safety. So there's 3% and 3%. Each facility on an annual basis also has to pay make a payment of $25,000 to substance abuse prevention. And then there's also a $10,000 donation to the scholarship fund. So I think that the 2-3% taxes and the $25,000 is a lot for business. We don't have the liquor stores do that, but I think it's going to help ASAP and Dixie Solutions have some kind of funding to continue these conversations and everything else that I don't even know in your world. It goes to Fair Winds and just, you know, I'm sure you guys are already kind of thinking of where you could use that money for prevention, you know, when it comes in. Yeah, Tom.
Mr. Selectman, how come there is no fee for the liquor stores?
No.
How come there is none?
That I don't know. Sarah could probably talk about that.
We're talking about alcohol. And how come this, I agree with protecting children, but primarily this is an adults forum. It's about the dispensary that is severely restricting everybody under 21. But how come the enemy is cannabis, and there's $25,000 fee for going to substance abuse that the dispensary has to, or every dispensary, I guess, in the state has to put up for some committee, for alliances like yours. But Hatches, the Islander, nothing.
Yeah.
This island has about 100 different venues in which you can get alcohol.
Right. So I think somebody, did you have a comment on that, Jack?
Yeah, I do. So when you're looking at a system that's already in place, like buying alcohol, it's a lot easier to set new restrictions for cannabis than it is to go back into all those laws for liquor and add in all these new bylaws that then all these companies that are already in place need to do. So when you're looking at the cannabis industry, it's such a newer industry in terms of regulation that they're putting in place things that they should have put in place for liquor stores.
Just a little falling back to you. I don't think it takes too long to pass a little amendment to a law.
Mhm.
They could whack that down the State House in about 20 hours.
I think we agree, Tom. We're going to go to this next question here.
So I'm reading one of the facts on this Tips for Teens that says marijuana smoke deposits 4 times more tar in the lungs and contains 50% to 70% more cancer-causing substances than tobacco smoke does. And I'm wondering, relating to kids, is there any regulations with secondhand smoke on like areas that you can or cannot smoke, like restaurants, etc., if that fact is true?
I believe in Massachusetts you cannot smoke cannabis in public, period. And there are no current, I believe at some point people will start to try and have a social, I forget what they call it, but social consumption, like basically a bar, but for social consuming of cannabis. So that may come down eventually, but right now you can use it in your home and on your property, but I don't believe you can have it in public anywhere.
For Nantucket, in Massachusetts, but Nantucket, you can't smoke marijuana on any public land, beaches, sidewalks, anything public. Of course, not restaurants as well, but anything public. Now, how do you enforce that? That's a whole nother ballgame, but it's illegal to smoke it on public land, even cigarettes.
There's lots of outdoor open space.
It's private, if they allow it.
And are you allowed to smoke in somebody else's private?
If it's private, I believe. It might get tricky at that point. You have a question?
Well, you were just saying that it's illegal to smoke in public, but I see it all the time. I see it at the playground. I see people dropping their kids off Boys and Girls Club, and you can smell it coming out of their car. It's everywhere.
That's an enforcement
So
issue.
this again is the question of who suffers the consequences of these policies being enforced against them. So if you look at the court report, it is an excellent example of I don't think it's a representative sample of who is committing crimes on Nantucket. I think it is a representative sample of against whom are these laws being enforced. And so I think it is very similar around the conversation about smoking cigarettes on a beach versus smoking cannabis when you're dropping your kids off at the Boys and Girls Club. Yes, it is a question of, do we have the manpower resources to enforce every single person who does that? But it's also about who, as a public narrative, who do we choose to criminalize for certain behavior? And I'm not saying that this is a Nantucket specific comment. I'm saying as a country, we wield drug policy against particular communities versus others. And I think you would see that with alcohol consumption and with nicotine consumption. So for example, when there is a person suffering from a mental health experience who is being pesky in some sort of way, and we don't like that because it disrupts our image as a community, what are they arrested for? They are very often arrested for public intoxication, for disrupting the peace. They're arrested for things that millions of other people on this island are doing. It's not that thing we have an issue with. It's not their public consumption of alcohol, but it's what we arrest them for in order to criminalize something about them that we dislike. So I think to your point, we are weaponizing drug policy against certain people versus others, which is why you're seeing people who are not at all going to be arrested for those things.
Thank you, Sarah. Any last comments from everybody as we wrap up? Anything we missed?
I'd like to hear from the audience. your opinion about what we could do better as clinicians or as we're continuing down this path. Any thoughts?
You can just shout them out.
As clinicians, maybe you could write a collective letter asking the federal government to make this a lead schedule so that it can be tested, actually tested, instead of people hypothesizing. That's what I would do. The drug has to be tested. Right now, it's the FDA just put a hammer down saying it has no medical or therapeutic. It's not allowing that. And a lot more it could happen. Like someone had mentioned on the board that has been studied in Europe for decades. Because there are no fences and no parameters, and it's like constrained like this. And as a result, we are just so far behind in knowing or not knowing.
Tom, is there anything else that you would like these 5 panelists to do in their clinicians? I mean, they can write a letter. Does it?
No, I don't have any.
I think we all agree with you what you're saying. Yes.
Backtracking a little bit to the discussion of testing, will you be testing for terpenes in your product as well?
Question was, will they be testing for terpenes?
We are doing some testing for terpenes. They're very important. We hadn't touched on this. This is a whole other subject that could go on for a long time. But we are very passionate about the combination of all the cannabinoids, the THC, the CBD, the CBN, CBG, terpene content. It's very important for plants. We're doing a little bit of terpene testing right now, but we hope to get into that more over time. It's also, I think Massachusetts is just a little bit behind. Other states are more advanced with testing terpenes and realizing how important they are for the product. This is another thing I could go on for a very long time about, but it's called the entourage effect. That's why you all go out now and you just see CBD products. So that's just getting one component as opposed to all the other products or cannabinoids or terpenes that you could get for kind of a whole plant experience. So I just touched on that. I'm very passionate about that. I don't know if anyone wants to talk about it with me later on. I'd be glad to.
I have a follow-up question. Is Massachusetts allowed to share technology with other states in the cannabis industry?
I'm not quite sure about sharing technology per se. I mean, they are sharing information, and some things that are sold in other states are used here too. Yeah.
I was once told that in some states when marijuana became legalized, that other more serious drugs were pushed on the black market. I just was wondering if anybody else heard that.
So this is a very common scare tactic to say that if you put drug dealers out of cannabis business, they will diversify their product offering and start pushing opiates and start pushing stimulants and start pushing methamphetamines and other substances on people, that they'll just diversify and start selling something else. But there was some very excellent research that just came out and a lot of lawsuits coming out about how opiate drug companies are actually much more responsible for the opiate epidemic than drug dealers ever were or ever are. So I'm suspicious of that. I think that is a very common talking point, but I don't necessarily have any clinical research I can point you to that says that drug dealers have instant access. It's not like they have a warehouse of all different types of drugs. And if cannabis isn't selling that day, they can just go into their drug warehouse and start selling cocaine. That's not how supply and demand for drug markets work. There's a whole supply chain process that can't be so easily disrupted by your regular average off the street drug dealer. Is it possible that at the level of cartels that industries and businesses that make their money through drug laundering could say, as a marketing strategy, we're going to start to shift and diversify? Absolutely. The average everyday off the street drug dealer in a community is not necessarily going to have the contacts and the resources to start selling a different kind of product.
Thank you for that question, because I thought the same thing earlier. I didn't ask it. Yep.
I'm just curious what can be done in the schools with education, drug abuse prevention education, since DARE has failed miserably. What is replacing that, especially now in light of the legalization of marijuana and alcohol? You know, we still have the issues.
The question was of education in school.
So Fairwinds is really proud to partner with the Nantucket Public School to offer a K through 12 substance abuse clinician embedded within the entire school department. This would be psychoeducation that would be age appropriate, as well as clinical intervention. The bad news is that we have not been able to hire that clinician to start the position for the next 3 years. So the school is aware of it and recognizes there was a gap in knowledge and that there needed to be a different approach. The staff were excited to have different ways and different educational points to access the youth, but hiring on a small island and housing is challenging, but I think that there's a lot of interest and opportunity there.
For ASAP, we do work with, we try to work with the health teachers, supply them with information, training. We offer in-school education in assemblies for the students, and I'm working on some professional development for the faculty of the public schools and actually all of the schools. We're constantly trying to get into the buildings to try and share information with the teachers and with the students. We get a little pushback because there are so many regulations the schools have to follow and how much rules and requirements and standardized test scores that it's hard to fit it all in, but we keep assuring them that this is really important.
And I personally donate my time to the Lighthouse School and the new school and do substance abuse education prevention for their students. And we are hoping to roll that out to do that at different grade levels. So far, it's just been the upper grades. One of the other things too, in terms of if our ultimate goal is for consenting adults to have the option to partake and for teens and children to not have access and be less inclined to seek it out, if that's really our goal, one of the things that we could do would be anti-poverty initiatives and to support young people having access to role models. And that is not necessarily the bailiwick of professionals. It's not to say that they need a therapist or that they need a professional person to serve as that mentor. But one of the single biggest predictive factors for delayed substance use is for a child to have another adult, not a parent, in their life that they trust. If you look at children who delay experimentation, it does not matter if that adult is sober. It matters if there is another person in their life besides their parents that they can trust, that they can go to for support. That's actually the single biggest predictive factor for delayed substance experimentation.
On that note, we're going to close this up. We get a round of applause for our panel and their time.